Hey everyone, Romeo here, a fellow Spanish language learner. In this video, I want to review Intermediate Spanish Grammar by Gilda Nissenberg. But this video is not just a book review, because after finishing this book, I'm even more confident about something I've been saying recently. I don't have a Spanish grammar problem anymore, I have a Spanish recall problem. But before I get into that, let me actually review the book. Overall, I think Intermediate Spanish Grammar is a pretty decent book. It covers most of the major grammar concepts that an intermediate Spanish learner may need to review. The book has 20 chapters and each chapter focuses on its own specific topic. So that means you're not jumping all over the place. You're not reading a giant grammar reference book where every section feels like it was just thrown together. It has a pretty methodical structure. And it's also relatively short. The book is only about 208 pages long, so if someone is highly ambitious and can really concentrate, they could get through the book in about 20 days by doing one chapter per day. That means reading the chapter, doing the exercises, checking the answers, and actually spending time with the material. I started the book on April 19th, 2026, and I finished it at the end of last month on June 29th, 2026. For the most part, I spent about 2 days per chapter, but I spent more time on the areas that I already knew were weaker for me. For example, Chapter 8 covers direct and indirect object pronouns and commands, and Chapter 19 covers the present subjunctive. Those are the chapters where I slowed down a little bit more because those are the structures I know I still need to make faster and more automatic. Now, let's talk about what I liked. The first thing I liked is that the book doesn't take forever to finish. That matters. A lot of grammar books are useful, but they're so long that most learners actually never finish them. And I think that completion matters. An imperfect grammar book that you actually finish is more useful than a perfect grammar book that just sits on your desk. This book is short enough to finish, but it still covers enough to be useful. The second thing I liked is the exercises. For the most part, the exercises are pretty helpful. And what I especially liked is that some of the exercises require you to translate from English into Spanish. That matters because English to Spanish translation is recall. You're not just recognizing Spanish, you're being forced to produce it. And that is much closer to the real problem that a lot of us have. A lot of us can read a Spanish sentence and understand it, but when we have to produce that same structure ourselves, we slow down. That's recall. And this book gives you some opportunities to stress test that. Another thing I like, and this is something Gilda Nissenberg also does in some of her other books, is that at the end of many chapters, she gives you a paragraph in English that you have to translate back into Spanish. I like that because instead of only filling in blanks or choosing between options, you're forced to hold a larger idea in your head and rebuild it in Spanish. That exposes your weak spots very quickly. Another thing about the book is that it introduces a decent amount of vocabulary that I hadn't seen before. Sometimes that vocabulary appeared in example sentences, and other times it appeared in translation exercises towards the end of the chapter, and that could be a good thing. If you're using this book not just to review grammar, but also to expand your vocabulary, there's a lot that you can pull from. But for me personally, this was a little bit hit or miss. Not because the vocabulary was bad, the issue is that I didn't really have a plan to review it. When I came across words I didn't know, I just wrote them down in my notebook. Because right now, my vocabulary focus is coming from another source, which is Espanol C. So I'm not trying to turn this grammar book into another vocabulary system. And that's the important point. Vocabulary only helps if you actually review it. Seeing a word once and writing it down is not the same as learning it. So if you're not using another vocabulary source, you could absolutely use this vocabulary from this book and build a review system around it. The other thing I like about this book is that it feels like a hybrid between the other books that I've used. If I compare it to Complete Spanish Step by Step by Barbara Breckstein and Gilda Nissenberg's other book, Complete Spanish Grammar, this book would sit somewhere in the middle. What I liked about Complete Spanish Step by Step is that it builds very methodically. It starts with the things that every Spanish learner needs to understand, like articles, nouns, adjectives, present tense verbs, and others, and then it gradually builds into more complicated structures. That book feels like it was designed to take someone from the beginning and then build them up step by step. With Gilda Nissenberg's other book, Complete Spanish Grammar, I didn't feel that same clean build up. It's useful, but it feels more like a grammar review book than a true sequence. Intermediate Spanish Grammar, on the other hand, does a better job of giving you a cleaner path. It's not as foundational as Complete Spanish Step by Step, but it's more organized than Complete Spanish Grammar. So for someone who already has a foundation and just wants to review Spanish grammar, I think this book makes sense. Now, the main and probably the only negative that comes top of mind. There are errors in this book. Not enough errors for me to say that the book is bad. Not enough errors for me to say don't use it. But there were definitely moments where I looked at the answer key and thought, no, that is not the correct answer. Or in some cases, the answer key just seemed off. That matters because if someone is not strong enough in Spanish yet, that can be pretty frustrating. You can give an answer that's actually correct, compare it against the answer key, and then you think you're wrong. So I would not recommend this book to someone who needs hand holding, and I would not recommend it to someone who has never studied Spanish grammar before. But if you already have a foundation and you can catch some of those issues when they show up, then the errors are more annoying than fatal. So overall, I think Intermediate Spanish Grammar is a decent book. It has a methodical approach, it covers the important grammar, it has useful exercises, it gives you English to Spanish translation practice, it introduces vocabulary, and it's short enough to finish without turning it into a 6-month project. But the bigger takeaway, at least for me, is personal. After going through this book and after already studying Complete Spanish Step by Step and Complete Spanish Grammar, I'm very confident that I don't need another grammar book to solve my main Spanish problem, because I don't have a grammar problem anymore. I have a recall problem. When I read grammar explanations now, the rules are pretty clear. I understand what's being explained, I understand why the structure works, and I understand the difference between the concepts. But understanding the rule is not the same thing as being able to produce the structure quickly when I need it. That's where the real problem is. It's not that I don't understand object pronouns. It's that when I need to say something like I already gave it to him, I still have to retrieve the structure fast enough. Ya se lo di. That sentence is not hard to understand when I see it, but producing it quickly is a different skill. And it's the same thing with the subjunctive. It's the same thing with the commands. It's the same thing with tense selection. And it's the same thing while choosing between the preterite and the imperfect while I'm already in the middle of speaking. A grammar book can explain the rule, but another grammar book is not going to magically make the rule faster in my mouth. That requires recall training. That requires producing the structure. That requires repetition. And that requires testing whether I can actually say the thing that I understand. And that's where I think a lot of intermediate learners need to be honest. Sometimes we keep buying grammar books because it feels productive, and grammar books are useful. But after a certain point, the issue is not that we need the same rule explained for the 4th time. The issue is that we need to train ourselves to access that rule faster. That is a different problem. And that's why I built Structured Recall, and that's why I use it every day. For me, if I do use another grammar book again, I'll probably just go back to the one that I already highly recommend to everyone, which is Complete Spanish Step by Step by Barbara Breckstein. Not because it covers every single thing in Spanish, because no grammar book does that, but because it gives me the cleanest foundation and the best structure for continued review. For everything else, real speech and real reading, I'll use those for my prompts. So when I come across something in a video, a conversation, a book, or a transcript that I don't understand, I'll just look it up. And that, I believe, is more useful to me now than jumping from grammar book to grammar book, collecting more example sentences and more vocabulary that I'm probably not going to review anyway. So going forward, I'm going to constrain more of my studies. Instead of looking for new grammar books just to find more exercises, I'm going to pull more of my translation and recall practice from the resources that I already use. That way, I can compress my study time. I can review grammar, I can train recall, and I can expand vocabulary. And I can keep everything connected to the Spanish that I'm actually hearing and watching. So, in summary, my review is simple. Intermediate Spanish Grammar is a solid grammar review book for someone who already has a foundation. It's not perfect, it has some answer key issues, but it is useful, short, and practical. But the bigger lesson for me, though, is that I'm done pretending that more grammar explanations are the answer to my current problem. At this stage, I don't need to understand Spanish grammar again. I need to recall it faster. And that's a completely different kind of work. So if you're learning Spanish and you keep reviewing grammar, but still can't produce the Spanish that you understand, ask yourself a serious question. Do you really have a grammar problem, or do you have a recall problem? Because those are not the same thing. Anyway, if you were thinking about picking up this book and this review gave you enough information to make your decision, be sure to like the video. And if you're a serious Spanish learner trying to build more functional, usable Spanish, be sure to subscribe to the channel. And until the next video, peace.